Chief Justice John Roberts walked into the hearing room expecting nothing out of the ordinary, until Representative Jasmine Crockett used his own statements to challenge him, leaving the room in stunned silence. There was a noticeable hush in room 201 of the Rayburn House office building. Not a calming silence, but the kind that signals a moment of tension just before something significant happens. On paper, this was just another scheduled hearing, but everyone present could sense that it would be different. Seated at the witness table, Chief Justice Roberts wore a neatly tailored navy suit, likely more expensive than what most attendees earned in a month. He appeared at ease, composed, and some might say a bit overconfident. This wasn't unfamiliar territory for him. He had testified before Congress on multiple occasions and knew how to navigate these settings. Speak just to enough, manage the pace, and stay above political squabbles. But this hearing wasn't about theoretical discussions on the Constitution. It focused on something that made even long-serving justices shift in their seats: judicial ethics. Public concern had been increasing. There were questions about impartiality, undisclosed gifts, and personal relationships that raised red flags but never officially surfaced. The public was paying attention, and the presence of cameras meant there was no judicial robe to hide behind. Committee members each took their allotted time. Some asked easy questions, others attempted to strike a delicate balance, cautious, but not weak. Then, it was her turn. A pause followed as her name was formally entered into the record: Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas. She adjusted the microphone and leaned in slightly. Her tone didn't need to rise, it already held authority. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." Some in the room didn't immediately take notice. They had heard of her, a former public defender, relatively new in Congress, often vocal during floor debates, known for her direct style. But this was a different setting. She now sat across from the most senior figure in the federal judiciary. You could almost sense people silently wondering how long she would hold up under the pressure. Justice. Roberts remained still. He offered her a smile, the kind seasoned officials use often, polite but calculated, as though responding to a promising student's question. But Crockett wasn't seeking approval. Her goal was accountability. "Chief Justice," she began, "you've previously said the court follows a high ethical standard, even without a formal code. Is that right?" Roberts folded his hands and responded evenly. "That is correct, Congresswoman. The justices follow long-standing principles that shape judicial conduct." She nodded while flipping through documents. "So help me understand. If that's the case, why was there no disclosure regarding the connection between Justice Merritt and a political donor whose case was in front of the court just last year?" That question drew attention. Cameras clicked. A few heads turned. This time, Roberts didn't return the smile. Instead, he made a small adjustment to his tie. "I'm not in a position to speak on ongoing ethical evaluations or issues related to specific justices." "Right," Crockett said, glancing down momentarily before locking eyes again. "But you can comment on precedent, can't you?" "Yes." "Good," she replied. "Because as I understand it, and feel free to correct me, the Supreme Court has historically used the appearance of impropriety as a guiding standard. It's not just about whether something is technically wrong, but whether the public has reason to suspect it might be." Roberts adjusted his posture slightly. "The appearance standard has indeed influenced many institutions, yes." Crockett didn't hesitate. "Then wouldn't it seem inappropriate if a justice failed to disclose a close relationship with someone who stood to gain financially from a court decision?" She kept her tone steady. There was no need to raise her voice. The room was all ready. Quiet. Roberts maintained his composure, but the conversation had clearly turned. He replied with caution. "Congresswoman, I believe we're moving into hypotheticals." "I'm not," she said. "I'm referring to documented facts from your own court's financial disclosures." And yet, the most pivotal moment in the room hadn't arrived yet. Robert straightened, one hand resting on the polished wood of the table. His practiced eyes scanned Crockett's face. She didn't waver. Her gaze held firm, her tone unchanged. "I'm quoting directly from those disclosure documents, Chief Justice," she repeated, slower this time, as if challenging him to refute her source. He cleared his throat. "Those forms are compiled by the administrative office of the court and I trust that the process is handled diligently. But do you personally review them? She asked, tilting her head slightly. Do you make sure they're clear and accurate? He paused. Not for long, but it mattered. There's a system in place, he replied. Each justice is individually responsible for their own disclosures. Crockett leaned back in her chair. She didn't smile. This wasn't about winning points. She let the silence speak first. Then, interesting, she said, because where I come from, if you're the one reviewing your own work, that's not accountability. That's just self-checking. A few people in the gallery exchanged subtle looks. One staffer let out a soft, skeptical exhale, a mix of a laugh and disbelief. Roberts attempted to steer the discussion. With respect, Congresswoman, the judiciary was established to operate independently from the legislative and executive branches. Our role is to interpret the law, not respond to political influence. And no one here is trying to interfere with that. Crockett replied, We're not here to dictate court decisions. We're asking why certain patterns continue, and why no one seems to address them. Roberts opened his mouth, but she raised a hand. Not to interrupt, but to lead into her next point. I've spent years in Texas courtrooms, she said, watching judges lecture young men, black, brown, white, didn't matter, on responsibility. How even looking dishonest could derail their futures. So, forgive me if I find it hard to accept that the highest court in the land shouldn't be held to the same expectation. Roberts shifted again subtly. Congresswoman, I hear your concern, but we've always taken such matters seriously, and we respond through internal procedures with integrity. You have no binding code, Crockett interjected. And those reviews? They come from inside the house. A pause. That's like asking a fox to write the security report on the henhouse. This time, there was a low murmur at the back. Camera shutters clicked faster. Reporters leaned in slightly. She wasn't putting on a show. She was holding him to the facts. Roberts inhaled slowly through his nose. His fingers pressed slightly into the edge of the table. He was still composed, but his tone now carried the edge of someone realizing the situation was more precarious than he anticipated. The court is not above public scrutiny, he said. But I must remind the Congresswoman that mutual respect between co-equal branches remains vital. Crockett looked down briefly, then up again. A flicker of frustration passed across her face, not because she felt defeated, but because she recognized that respect was being used to sidestep the issue. I do respect the court, she said. I respect what it represents, but respect without honesty is just a formality. The people who elected me, they didn't send me here to admire your robe. They sent me here to ask why the standards seem to shift depending on who wears it. Robert studied her a little longer now. The difference was subtle but clear. He was no longer viewing her as a newcomer. He was facing someone determined to question every legal technicality he tried to rely on. And she wasn't done yet. What came next wasn't about rhetoric. The stack of documents in Jasmine Crockett's folder wasn't thick, just a few stapled sheets, but it carried weight. Not the kind you hear, but the kind that makes people pause. She slid one page forward on the desk and adjusted her microphone. Chief Justice, are you familiar with Dalton versus Mason County, decided by the Fifth Circuit in 2009? Roberts squinted. Not confused, just calculating, vaguely. It involved a procedural ruling about recusal, if I recall. You recall correctly, Crockett said. It involved a judge who didn't step away from a case despite indirect financial ties to one of the law firms involved. The ruling made it clear. Even the appearance of bias was enough for disqualification. She tapped the edge of the document. And yet, just last year, Justice Harlan participated in Macon versus Delta Rail, a case where his longtime friend and financial supporter had a lot to gain from the ruling. Roberts didn't speak immediately. Crockett leaned in slightly. No. Recusal. No explanation, no transparency, and the decision a narrow 5-4. This wasn't just calling something out. It was a precise cut into the court's usual defenses. Roberts exhaled slowly. Congresswoman, I'm not here to debate individual cases. I'm not asking you to, she replied. I'm asking how a court founded on fairness expects Americans to trust it when some decisions seem more like private arrangements than impartial rulings. A few quiet gasps followed. Nothing loud, but noticeable. A staffer's pen fell and bounced on the floor. Roberts leaned in closer to the microphone. "Your comments are inflammatory," he said. "And your silence," Crockett responded calmly, "has been even worse." She spoke slowly, letting her words settle before continuing. "There's a woman named Carla Jennings in my district. She's a single mother who's worked night shifts at a hospital for 2 decades. Her son was denied financial aid because of a clerical error that wrongly listed her as owing back taxes. She appealed all the way to a federal court and was essentially told his tough luck." She paused and looked directly at Roberts. "But a billionaire with personal ties to a sitting justice can get their case accepted, argued, and ruled on, all within 4 months. And they get a favorable outcome." Roberts's eyes narrowed slightly. His hands were now clasped tighter than before. He hadn't anticipated this level of preparation, especially from her. "The court," he said, "has limited capacity and must make hard choices about which cases to hear. That doesn't indicate favoritism, but perception matters, doesn't it?" she asked. He didn't answer. She asked again. "Chief Justice, does perception matter?" He nodded subtly. "Of course." Crockett's voice dropped slightly. "Then maybe it's time you paid more attention to what the public sees, because right now they don't see justice. They see a system protecting its own." For the first time, Roberts had no immediate response. The room remained quiet. The committee chair didn't step in. No one wanted to interrupt what was clearly becoming a pivotal exchange. And Crockett, she still hadn't raised her voice. She turned another page. "I came here today with respect, but I also brought facts, and the facts show your institution has a serious problem, one we can't keep ignoring." But the real shift hadn't happened. Not until the Chief Justice understood who was really sitting across from him. That change in Roberts's tone was obvious to everyone. He leaned forward slightly, clasped his hands again, trying to maintain control. But his voice was different now, less steady, more uncertain. "Congresswoman," he began, "I understand your concern, but I'd caution against making judgments based on individual examples, especially without understanding the full judicial process." Crockett didn't flinch. "With all due respect, Chief Justice, I'm not jumping to conclusions. I'm connecting the dots. There's a difference." And that was the moment she felt the balance shift. The attention in the room wasn't on Roberts anymore. It was on her. She made her next move. "In 2013, she said, holding up another sheet, "you gave a commencement address at Harvard Law. You told graduates, and I quote, 'Your credibility is your currency.' You said, 'The moment people stop believing in your integrity, everything else falls apart.'" Roberts leaned back slightly. "That's correct." "Then tell me," she said, her tone sharpening, "how can credibility survive when trust in this court is lower than it's been in decades? When surveys show more Americans believe the court follows politics over principle?" He didn't respond right away. So she continued, "You don't get to spend 2 decades shaping your legacy, then act surprised when the silence around your colleagues starts to break it apart." Roberts began to speak, but Crockett didn't wait this time. "You called this passion. It's not, it's precision. I'm not shouting. I'm not making assumptions. I'm asking why Americans like Carla Jennings are held to rules your justices seem free to overlook openly." Her voice dropped, steady, more grounded. "Do you know what it feels like to enter a courtroom knowing the odds are against you before you say a word? I do. I've seen young men break down after sentencing because they knew they never had a fair chance, because justice was never about truth. It was about access, about influence, about time." The room grew heavier in its silence. No tapping, no side comments, just Crockett's words hitting like glass being cracked. Roberts attempted to respond. "The court has taken measures." "Not enough," she interrupted. "Not when billionaires take justices to luxury retreats and no one raises a concern. Not when decisions that affect millions are made behind closed doors no one can knock." And then came the line. "You're right about one thing, credibility is currency. And right now your institution is overdrawn." That landed harder than anything she'd said so far. A clerk in the back rushed to jot it down. the pen nearly tearing the paper. For the first time, Roberts didn't reach for a reply. He just sat still. Crockett let the silence stretch. 2 long moments. Then she leaned back, letting her words settle across the room. This wasn't showmanship. It wasn't a performance. She was doing what others hadn't, naming the court's power for what it had become: shielded, selective, unreachable. Roberts straightened his tie again, but it looked more like a nervous habit than a sign of assurance. The committee chair cleared his throat, ready to move forward. But even he hesitated, whether out of respect or because he wasn't sure how to follow what just happened. Crockett wasn't done. Not until the public was part of this moment, too. She didn't just come to challenge a Supreme Court justice. She came for something broader, something that mattered to those at home who couldn't name the cases but carried their impact daily. She took a breath, her voice now slower, more deliberate. Less like cross-examination, more like a conversation. "There's a man in Odessa," she said, "Jorge Salgado. He drives trucks. Worked through the pandemic without complaint or time off. But when his brother was detained in a private immigration center and denied medical care, he filed a petition. The court dismissed it without even hearing the facts." She turned to Roberts. "He couldn't understand why. So I told him, because that's how the law is written, and the system makes it nearly impossible to challenge injustice when it's wrapped in language designed to protect the powerful." She leaned closer. "And the highest court in this country had the chance to fix that. But you refused to hear the case. No explanation, no reasoning, nothing." Roberts remained silent, so Crockett kept going. "These aren't made-up examples, Chief Justice. These are people who still believe in the law even when it fails them. People who think that if they work hard enough, if they follow the rules, someone in power might care enough to listen." Now she turned to the entire room. "Not just Roberts. We have to ask, what happens when those people lose faith? When they stop believing justice is possible for someone who doesn't run a company, fund a campaign, or sit on a corporate board?" Her voice had a raw edge. Not anger, not performance, just truth. She paused briefly, then went on. "I became a lawyer because I thought the law could create fairness. I stayed a lawyer because I learned the law is only as fair as the people who apply it. And today I'm sitting across from someone who holds more power than most of us will ever touch, but refuses to admit that power can go unchecked." Roberts finally responded, but his tone was no longer firm. "Congresswoman, I don't deny that some decisions have serious outcomes, but the role of the court is not to act as savior. It's to interpret the law as it is written." Crockett nodded once. "And what happens when the law is written to benefit a few? When it's interpreted to protect those already at the top?" She didn't need a reply. She knew it wouldn't come. "You speak about judicial independence," she said. "But independence without accountability isn't strength. It's isolation." Someone at the back whispered, "She's right." It wasn't loud, not for drama. Just one person saying what many were likely thinking. Crockett turned one final page. "This isn't just about politics. It's about principle. It's about telling people like Jorge and Carla that their lives matter, that their stories don't lose importance the moment they leave your courtroom." She looked around the room. "Because here's the truth. If this court won't hold itself responsible, then it's on the people, through us, to start asking harder, louder questions." The camera zoomed in on Roberts. His mouth formed a flat line. No smile, no expression. Just silence. She looked at him again. "I didn't come here to embarrass you. I came to remind you, justice isn't about titles. It's not about tradition. It's about people who still hope someone in power cares." But she hadn't come through fire just to deliver a speech. She had one last point to make, and it was going to stay with them. For several moments, no one said a word. The silence didn't ask permission. It simply arrived. Reporters stopped typing. Staffers stopped pretending to organize documents. Even committee members, many of whom hadn't shown much interest earlier, now sat quietly, eyes fixed on Crockett. Something had shifted. Roberts noticed it too. He still sat upright, but the energy around him had changed. The usual strategy, calm tone, legal phrases, formal distance, wasn't having the same effect. Not today. Not with her. Crockett gently shut her folder and placed her hands on the table. When she spoke again, her tone was calm, thoughtful. You know, back in St. Louis, there was this old judge, retired Army guy, tough as stone. He used to say something that stuck with me ever since. A courtroom is only as honest as the people bold enough to question it. She glanced over at Roberts. I think about that a lot lately. There were no cheers, no dramatic moments, just a strong weight to her words, like they were etched into the air. Roberts shifted slightly in his seat but stayed silent. His confidence hadn't disappeared. It had simply been matched finally by someone who didn't treat it as untouchable. Across the table, Representative Leonard Franks, a veteran from Bay, Arizona who rarely spoke up during hearings, leaned toward his microphone and said, "Damn, it wasn't policy, it wasn't debate, it was earned respect." And Crockett didn't react. She hadn't come for compliments. Chairman Bledsoe finally spoke, his voice a bit slower than usual. The committee thanks Representative Crockett for her line of questioning. Even he seemed to speak carefully, as if moving on too quickly might break the moment. Roberts picked up his water glass. His hand shook, just a little, barely noticeable to most, but Crockett noticed. She looked him straight in the eye. You don't need to agree with me, Chief Justice, but you heard me. That's all I came for. There was no hostility in her tone, no triumph, just something far harder to ignore. The plain truth, offered without apology. One by one, other members began to ask questions. But the energy in the room had shifted. The questions now sounded sharper, more sincere. No one wanted to follow her, but they had to. And no one wanted to look like they were undoing what she'd just done. Even Roberts responded differently now. His answers were briefer, more direct, less abstract. His charm was set aside. He wasn't defensive, but he was clearly more alert. Meanwhile, outside the hearing room, the moment had already gone. Viral. Clips from Crockett's exchange were spreading across social platforms quickly. People who usually ignored Supreme Court matters were now watching full clips from a hearing. In a cafe near the Capitol, a barista paused mid-order to replay one of her quotes. In a Dallas classroom, a young black girl turned to her teacher and asked, "Is she a lawyer?" And in households across the country, people who had long lost trust in the system felt something different. Representation that didn't feel like settling. Back in room 2141, Roberts looked over at Crockett again. Just for a moment. But this time, there wasn't distance in his eyes. There was something closer to acknowledgement, not of defeat, but of understanding. She wasn't some up-and-coming figure. She wasn't the future. She was the present. But even as the atmosphere returned to its usual pace, she had one last thing to add. Because this wasn't only about hearings or ethics, it was about what we leave behind. The room seemed normal again, at least outwardly. But anyone really paying attention could feel that something had changed. What had started as another tightly controlled hearing had now been defined, marked even, by a moment that couldn't be undone or talked over. Jasmine Crockett wasn't speaking anymore, but her presence still lingered. Her words remained in the air like a principle not yet formalized. She had done more than question a Supreme Court justice. She had made the entire system pause. As the hearing moved forward and other representatives began speaking, Crockett sat quietly, listening. No smiles, no remarks, just silence. She understood what had happened. There was no need to repeat it. About half an hour later, as the session wrapped up, Chairman Bledsoe announced a brief break. Members stretched, staff stood up, and a few reporters stepped out to send in updates. Roberts rose too, but before he could walk away, he turned slightly. Crockett didn't budge. "Congresswoman," he said, voice softer now, "your district is lucky to have you." She looked up. "I know." He nodded gently, less formal, more genuine this time, and walked away. He didn't seem shaken anymore, just quieter. As the room cleared, one young woman from the gallery, a law student from Missouri wearing a blazer a bit too big, approached Crockett carefully. "I just wanted to say," she began, "I didn't think anyone ever spoke to them like that." Not seriously. Crockett stood and adjusted her sleeves. "Spoke to them like what?" she asked. "Like they're not above you," the student answered. Crockett gave a slight smile, Not broad, not posed, just enough. They're not. That was all. She picked up her notes and walked out without another word. Later that evening, the clip reached national television. Not only political programs, but primetime coverage. What drew people in wasn't the confrontation. It was how composed it all was, how intentional. It didn't feel like Crockett had won a fight. It felt like she had led a seminar. Analysts tried to define it. Some said it pushed back against the norm. Others called it political theater. But those who watched the entire exchange, the ones who listened instead of reacting, sensed something else, clarity. For years, the public had been told that the Supreme Court was untouchable, out of reach. But Crockett had calmly, lawfully, shown that even revered institutions should still face questions. That unchecked power doesn't preserve order. It slowly wears it away. And maybe, just maybe, that slight discomfort in the hearing room was exactly what the process needed. Because the truth is, real change doesn't always arrive with noise and banners. Sometimes it comes in quietly through a single voice, a voice that doesn't hesitate even when challenged by power. And if someone like Jasmine Crockett could sit face to face with the Chief Justice of the United States and speak plainly, then maybe, just maybe, others could do the same in their own circles, in their neighborhoods, workplaces, or even in their homes. That's the thing about moments like these. They don't just belong to the few in the room. They belong to all of us. If this story struck a chord, hit that subscribe button because this is only the beginning. There's much more ahead.